So, Jim, welcome to a photographic eye, to a photographic life. Um, you've been on this podcast more than anybody.
Really?
And I've probably written about you more than anybody else as well. And just before we start, because it seemed to be a good time to touch base, but
Mm.
I'm just holding up a copy of Hungry Eye. That's why I said a photographic eye as well as life, because it seemed appropriate. 2012 was when I first published your photographs and came across you, and I'd like to think we've stayed friends since.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've One of the weirdest things about this journey, and it is a journey, and there's never a destination. That's the most important thing I always try and keep focused on. There's kind of like short-term goals, but there's no ultimate destination because the whole process is really about the journey. And there's a handful of people that have kind of been with me on this journey, if not from its inception, because that would be impossible because I was all by myself and didn't know anybody. But along the way, there's a handful of people. Sadly, uh, people like Stuart Pilkinson are no longer with us. He's been on my mind so much lately because I know he'd be really proud of what's happening. Um, but you're like number one. You were there right from the start, and you're damn right we're still friends, of course, because with you and Colin Wilkinson, then of Bluecoat and now of Image and Reality, you both did something that no one had ever done in my life for me, which is have faith and like champion me and be there as really, really no BS mentors with experience to back it up. And when you're surrounded or you have people like that that make themselves accessible to you, it it means everything, changes everything as well.
Well, it's in,
That's
yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I looked back at that issue, and
mm,
you were in there with Christopher Anderson, Bill Owens, Gregory Crewdson. Um, and I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing. But it was always because of the work. And I think here we are all these years later. You've got the second book coming out of Small Town Inertia.
mm.
Um, what's changed over those years? Has anything changed?
You mean in the subject matter or for me
I
or
think for you, I want to know about you because
hmm.
I just read the interview from 2012, and I don't think you've changed at all. I think you're still as committed today and saying the same things and making the same work, the same power of work, which
Hmm.
is a sort of a respect for the long form, which is very out of fashion these days.
Yeah, I mean, even before I knew what long form was, I knew that that was the thing. That's the thing that fit me. Um, and it was circumstantial, because of my position of being a carer and looking after my mother and, not having easy access to transport and having to do things really locally. So still never made a picture more than 3 miles from where I'm sat. Um, what's changed? I think I might have told this story a couple of times, but I'll share it with you because I know I've not told you. But the very first talk that I ever asked to be given in person was with Jim Stevenson, Click Click Jim
Yeah, great friend Jim down
in
at
Brighton.
the Brighton Talks.
He's brilliant. Um, and I'll never forget because I mean that was my first time ever speaking publicly, and everyone was really kind and really wonderful. And at the end of it, somebody asked me a question. They said, "Well, how do you deal with the stress? How do you deal with you know because it's long form and because you actually have authentic, real relationships, which has to happen. You can't be around somebody for months, years, decades now, without there actually being a really strong foundation that is essentially a real relationship. And that's something that I'm really that idea I'm really bound to in that I'm always there before the camera. The camera comes along, but I'm always me, and that's how everybody that I work with um, gets it. They know me before me, the photographer, if that makes sense.
It completely
Um,
makes sense because that's the, the camera is secondary, isn't it? But I'm going to tell you something that I've not told you. I was there at that talk you gave.
he,
Yeah,
did we
and
speak? I don't
no, we
think.
didn't.
No, we didn't.
I was at the background as usual.
Then you'll okay. You'll know this then. Somebody asked me how do you cope with the stress, and my answer, and I'll always remember it, is I just push through. I just carry on. Famous last words. This is the thing. Okay, so
Well, I
what
mean, but
I
it's interesting though, because at that point, Jim asked you to give that talk because he'd seen the article in Hungry Eye.
wow.
And so that's how small this world is. But at
Yeah,
that point, you
yeah.
could never have known what that really meant as
No,
to what you were going to have to push through.
no, no. I had an inkling. Things were starting to get difficult. I mean, I'll give you like the brief concise. I'll give you the concise version of maybe the 10-year period from 2012 to 20, yeah, just before COVID. Let's say 2019. I Lots of things happened personally to do with the family and to do with caring, people passing away, having to have increased amounts of uh, duties in my role as carer, you know, which was is very heavy, you know, when suddenly you're thrust into kind of being a mouthpiece for somebody, because you know you'll know this, being a carer, you're not there to tell someone else what to do, you're there to enable what they wish. That can sometimes cause problems if their message isn't particularly how do you say, uh it can cause problems, but then you have to be the intermediate. I kind of felt like Kofi Annan for the family for a long time. I was doing lots of delegating, but that coupled with, you know, my mum had a partial stroke, which affected her mobility really even more than it was. I mean, she's been bedridden for 30 years now, but that affected her left side. So of course there's more and more and more and more and more. Yeah, I think people maybe have an idea that carers, you know, do like 15 hours a week and that's just cups of tea and a bit of shopping. And it's not, it's 60 plus hours a week, plus everything. So that's happening. And at exactly the same time, um, I was 2 or 3 years into these stories and had really, really got to a point where I really deeply cared, if not loved, the people that I was working with, especially people like David, the blind gentleman. And while this was happening in relation to my family, his mother passed away of malnutrition, and David became terribly suicidal. And so I was dealing with like a family set of issues on one hand, but then my extended family as well, all of these people in my community. And it just got to a point where probably 3 years before the first book came out, unbeknownst to me, I started having panic attacks, violent panic attacks. And had no idea what was going on. And being a typical useful idiot, I did nothing. You look back and you think, well, I should instantly have gone to the doctors and said. And the reason I didn't was because I'd felt this pressure upon me because I was responsible for everything at home, but I was also kind of increasingly responsible for all of the people that I was making these stories with. And that wasn't something I was willing to give up. I wasn't prepared in any way to relinquish that responsibility because it was real. It is real. Anyway, so it ends up getting to a point where I have what was basically a 3 year panic attack, waking up every morning thinking I can't breathe, being hypersensitive to anything to do with illness, until I'm a gibbering mess. And my awesome girlfriend says, doctors. Go to the doctors, floods of tears, crying, I'm going to die. And she said, no, you're going to live to you're like 90. You're really healthy. And like that, I kind of instantly felt 50% better because that weight had been lifted from me. Started some pills for PTSD and essentially what it was, if you know the band, do you know the band Counting Crows?
Yeah, but not the
Yeah.
music, but I know the name.
Okay, you know the name. Well, the singer had this thing. He had gone through some trauma, and essentially it's called derealization, where you mentally you have so much stress that you feel like you're in a movie, and it's very out of it's just bad acid kind of a feeling. It's just not. You feel very disconnected from reality, and that's terrifying, coupled with panic attacks. Anyway, medicine helps. That was great. COVID happened, and that forced me to stay at home for 2 years, which ironically was the best thing because I was not going to stop going out as and when I could to continue working on these stories. And that kind of gave me a breather. That gave me, even though what was actually happening was pretty intense and stressful. Um, and even though I continued like daily, weekly to communicate with everybody, um, it forced me to have a little bit of a rest. And the lessons that I took from that, I'm really like avidly sharing with people that because I get asked a lot, how do you deal with this? How do you do this? How do you do that? And what I learned was at the start, at the start of this, you have to be in the car with your foot flat to the floor, and you got to keep going until the engine blows up. But then you've got to learn how to repair the engine and drive smart. You a little bit. I used to do things like I would work here for 15 hours, get an hour's sleep, walk into town, do an hour photographing and interviewing, come back, make food for the family, then edit, post, and do all the social media, and then get another hour's kit. And it wasn't until Laura pointed out to me that I did that basically for 10 years
But
without a break.
but Jim, you were incredibly giving during that time. And
Yeah.
you know, it reminds me when you're talking there. I mean, I've been lucky enough to have conversations with Don McCullen and Tim Page and Tim
Mm.
Hetherington and many other photographers who have gone through conflict.
Mm.
And in a sense, I think what you've documented over the last years and you've put yourself through is a kind of a social conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. I've
You know,
always felt that like these are, the amplification of stories of pain. They don't necessarily need bullets and bombs to be traumatic. Not for me, but for the people actually living it. And I think if there's two ways to be, isn't there? You're either a sponge or a stone. You let it wash over you and you just don't give an F, or it really matters to you. And it really matters to me. I
but
don't know. It couldn't be any other way.
no, not for you. But
Mm.
you're for me a touchstone so often when I'm talking about photography, because I raise your name and your work as I suppose, in a sense, a beacon of hope that there is still somebody doing this and telling these stories. But
Mm.
I wonder if it's
Oh.
possible to tell those stories today when so many people making work are so distant from the reality. They can't be empathetic to these situations because they can't
Mm.
actually connect with them.
That's something I was going to say worried, but it's actually something that scares me. It scares me that there are so few. I mean, put it like this: the voices that seem to get championed among photographers that, let's say, whether you believe in class or not, are working class or an underclass, are not, don't have an easy access into, let's say, education, and therefore, well, I was going to say the industry, but the industry doesn't exist where these kind of stories really get published anymore. You'd need a time machine to go back to the 70s and the 80s and the Sunday Times and Harold Evans and all of those amazing features. but that doesn't exist anymore. I don't know. I don't know who to blame. Is it the system? Is it the I I could quite easily go on a conspiratorial rant on social engineering and how dumb people are the easiest to manipulate. But it scares me because I would say that it's indicative or certainly symptomatic of the fact that maybe there aren't those people out there that actually care.
Mm.
Not that it's not that there aren't people out there that care, but just don't have the wherewithal or the sliver of the opportunity to make that work. Have we become a nation of people that only reacts to inflammatory propaganda, but we don't give a damn about our neighbor? Or, because I look back at the work that really inspired me, and that's, the Exit Photography Group, survival programs in British inner seas, um, camera work, all of like the Half Moon Gallery, Four Corners, all of that stuff was all community based. And it wasn't community based for clicks and likes. I can't even say it, see, it's a Freudian slip. It wasn't community based because it gave them an excuse to sit around a table and talk about their cameras. It was community based because there was a effing community.
Well, there was a political undercurrent,
Mm,
there to all of that. And it's funny enough, I was talking only recently for the podcast to Simon Roberts about this
mm,
because he and a friend, Nina, are setting up a
post.
collaborative, yeah, post, exactly, a
Amazing.
collaborative enterprise.
Mm,
Um, and we were talking about that very thing that there seems to be a lack of the, let's say, political with a medium-sized P,
mm,
not necessarily tied to an agenda, but
mm.
more of a kind of an agenda for people rather than a political agenda.
It's a humanist, the
Yeah,
politicization of basic human rights, I would say.
yeah. So
Almost,
humanist photography.
yeah, it's at the point now where I think the suffering has been so immense and happening for so long. And the trauma isn't just affecting now, it's generational trauma. It is going to affect families and children for the next 25, 50 years easily. If that's not a human rights issue, I'm not sure what is. And I think maybe in respect to the political, I mean, is there even, I mean, are there politics now? It just seems that there is nothing to choose from. And one of the things that's blown my mind was that, like, the week that I started Small Town Inertia was the same week I heard George Osborne saying, when we get in, just because this is before Cameron got in, we will rework the welfare state. And as a kid that had lived through Thatcher, I knew what that traditionally meant from a conservative politician. That meant we're going to go after the poor first. And they did. And that galvanized my desire to push back on this media narrative of everybody in benefits being a scrounger, of TV making it entertainment, poverty, etc., etc. If you'd have told me then that 15 years later I'd be doing that with a Labour government and that they would first go after the people, the very people that had been punished through austerity, I probably wouldn't have believed it. But so much has changed politically. Um, it's terrifying. It does scare me. It scares me and it terrifies me. I find it very, very sad because if there was ever a moment in time when work from all different types of communities and all different kinds of issues needs to be made, it's right now. And do you know what, Grant? People can't blame access to tools because
Right.
almost everybody's got a telephone.
Mm.
You can use it. What you can do with the telephone now is unbelievable. You, everybody's got a window to the world and for the world to them. I wonder if it can even happen again. I mean, I maybe hear from two people a year that want to try, and I know, I'm just one tiny fish in a massive fishbowl. So maybe there's more out there, but my God, they're needed. It's
Yeah.
neat. That's the
I don't
thing.
think there is. I mean, I'm just increasingly seeing photographic projects that
Mm.
feel so, and someone said to me the other day that I was fearless on this podcast, and I said, I'm not fearless at all, and I'm sure you feel the same. You're just speaking what you see,
Just being
and
honest.
yeah, and
I think
I
there's
just
not.
see so many projects that are just so shallow, of just kind of photographs of how people look, not how people feel.
Well, that's probably the tidal current coming off the Instagramification of reality.
Well, exactly that. And I was going to say that over the last, it is 15, is it 15 years? Yeah, nearly 15 years. Um, Social media has also transformed
Mm.
dramatically.
And transform people.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a two-way street, that's for sure. But you
Yeah.
were always very strong on social media. It kind of gave you a voice, I suppose, when you were, when you're in that environment that you're in, which is quite contained.
I like to follow instructions. So I've used this analogy before, but cameras are great because the lens points that way. It doesn't it doesn't point that way. So it already tells me what it is and what it does. And social media, for me, I was put it like this: I'm old enough but young enough to still kind of pick up on a lot of the counterculture stuff. I was too young for it, but I had people around me that would tell me stuff about the counterculture in the 60s and the 70s. And this idea that we had this tool that suddenly facilitated like a collective consciousness that we could all to use as intended. I don't believe that the people that invented the internet, or at least took it to the people, intended it to be what it became. I think, it's kind of like as dangerous as a gun, really, is where you aim it, whether you put bullets in it or you can use it to there's so much society and community could have done with social media.
But
Sometimes I have this. Yeah,
you
go
did
on.
no, sorry. I mean, it's just we haven't spoken for a while, so there's
Yeah.
some things. But it takes me back to those days on Twitter when you did the print sales, which was so fantastic, raising money for charity. And you've used social media to raise money to help those people
Yeah,
around.
tens of thousands.
Yeah.
It's what happened on with Twitter and X is wild because when that was taken over, I watched everybody run like rats from a ship. And I think that in respect to social media, that was the one place that most photographers were for the longest. Longer than Facebook, no one was on MySpace for photography. No, people were very anti Instagram then. There was no blue sky, none of this other thing. So mostly everybody was there. And I'd got to a point where, I think I had like 1 million impressions a month, which is all very well and good. But that exploded when X became X. And I think a lot of people that used it to survive, and for me, it was like a survival tool. That's what social media kind of is for me. Um, were really hit hard by that. Ironically, I was talking to Grok the other night, and I was explaining to Grok this, and they were being very empathetic with me, saying, "Oh, this is terrible. Yes, with the pay-to-play model, it has obviously affected people that can't afford." I was like, "This is really strange." This is um yeah, but social media for me was always, I mean, it was just like being given my own radio station or given my own shop, or my own I used to think of it as like Cheers, this is my place. You want to come in, let's talk. If you're rude, nick out you get, but let's make something happen. And you're right. Photo print day, I quite often have ideas just before I fall asleep, and then I have to like write them down. And it was when photo print day started, it was the first 3 days of the Ukraine conflict. And I thought there's got to be a way. Was that the first time I did it?
No, I
Um,
think that was the second time,
that,
you know.
that was the second time, wasn't it? Yeah,
Yeah, I think the first time it was just kind of let's raise some money.
it
You
was,
had
wasn't it?
some things you wanted to
This is
support.
the thing. When you don't live in the past, you forget most of the stuff that
I
you've
live in the
done.
past.
Um, yeah. So anyway, I just had, and it was brilliant for that.
Mm,
To raise, I think the first time we did it, we raised over £30,000 in a weekend. And all it was make a print, put it on Twitter, take a donation of £10 or above, get proof of the donation to a charity of your choice. You sort the shipping out, done. And but you can't do that now because um, that community or that that reach that was there that had been really hard earned over like what 13 years maybe gone.
mm,
Um, I'm working really hard on the other elements of social media to kind of get back up there so I can do something like that again. But I really like doing stuff with photography,
mm,
getting stuff done. Um, when it came to the Ukraine one, I found some great on the ground charities helping kids. And it didn't matter, where these kids were from, if they'd been affected in any way by that conflict, that money went straight to that charity to help them. And to see photography, God, I had so many, I literally haven't thought about this since I'd done it. So many letters from people saying, I never sold a print before. I never even made a print before, but I did it and I put it up. And do you know what? Someone donated 50 quid and I feel really good. I'm going to get a printer or I'm going to make more prints. And I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it because you know what it's like. You do something, you're on to the next thing, you know?
yeah.
You certainly don't sit there thinking, well, aren't I great because I had blah, blah, blah. I like the idea of empowering community to do stuff. And for me, I used to get people writing to me all the time saying, what do I do this? How do I do that? I said, no, 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 you're missing the point. This is DIY. There's just basic rules. You take it, you run with it. It's yours. The idea that you can, and that's the thing about the internet or social media that I find fascinating and the big missed opportunity. And it makes me wonder if there aren't people like above our pay grade in power somewhere that think, do you know what? If people cottoned on to how they can really use social media, we're I can't swear, can I? But
Ideally
you,
not. But
you get the point.
yeah, I do, and it actually reminds me of a really great story that when the Pompidou building was designed
Mm,
to be in the center of Paris,
mm,
Richard Rogers, the architect, and the idea initially was all around the top of the building. It was going to have television screens, and this was like back in the late 1960s, and it was going to have these screens. And
mm,
because of the riots in 68 in Paris and so forth, the government stepped in and said, absolutely not. You're not going to have screens around this building because if someone got control of the screens, they would
mm,
be able to broadcast to
mm,
the city and give out that message. And of course, now we
mm.
have that kind of technology in our
So
hands.
interesting. It's so interesting you mentioned that because what I've been noticing recently, because it's been happening locally, and up until now it hasn't really been happening locally, is the rise of self-designated YouTube patriot journalists documenting these protests outside what they perceive to be hotels full of invaders. And this is the thing. I'm watching people who I couldn't oppose more in their ideology and philosophy. In fact, I feel really kind of sorry for these people because, man, have they been hoodwinked. I have always said, probably my whole life, the greatest trick power ever played was getting poor people to blame other poor people for their poverty.
Mm.
Because while you're blaming the person next to you, you're not blaming the power. And to see, like, essentially what would have been Combat 18 and the NF and the BMP and the EDL and all their many guises, if they can work out how to use social media, but we still don't have like the counterpoint to that.
We don't.
That scares me,
Yeah, but
frankly.
you know, putting the work together for this second book,
Mm,
how as because as you say, everything's changed and nothing has changed.
yeah. Well,
So
that was the motivation. Look, I would love to not do this, but I do it because my promise is, whilst I still see this literally in arm's distance from my life and in my own life, and I don't see, you know, I kind of hold media responsible for this. Media has the opportunity to really hold these policies and these people to account. It's never going to happen. It will never happen. Um, so I look to my heroes and to my touchstones, and they could be both sides of the Atlantic. Photographers that made work from within their community, not just as like not just as in like an activist sense in the moment, but also just to preserve what happened. You know, I've got this. There's a bit in the in book two where I've actually written something which I didn't expect to do, and I won't give it away, but the emphasis is on, you know, when history writes about what has happened to families up and down every ethnicity, every sexuality, able-bodied, disabled, they won't humanize. It will just be statistics, and we are relegated to numbers. 300,000 affected directly by austerity. We don't have a name. We don't have a foothold in history, even. We to have it like most massacres, the humanity is swept under the carpet. And, you know, a political decision that results in, you know, 300,000 attributable deaths. Okay, so you didn't use guns. It was like we were talking about earlier. How is it, if it still results in death, how are these people not held accountable? It's a really strange
it is, but we
state of
live,
affairs, I feel,
yeah,
you know.
we live in a data-driven environment, don't we? Where, you know, and photography has such an opportunity to actually demonstrate some empathy. I mean,
It's the
you've always
perfect.
spoken about yourself being a conduit.
Yeah. But I'm not okay, okay. I am, right?
Oh,
But here's the thing. I can remember talking to you once and you were like, "Oh, Jim, you know, you've got to understand that you're a photographer." And I'm like, "No, I'm not a photographer." All right. I mean, of course I'm a photographer. I get it. But I guess what I meant back then is still kind of what I mean now, which is that's not the emphasis in my head. Because if that was steering me, I'd be shooting tits and cars and I'd be rich and I wouldn't live in a shed. So I can't let that steer me. I have to always keep my foot on the throat of that idea and really just make sure I'm always in the position where where I back up what I believe, which is a photograph is still all of this time later, if and when coupled with testimony, the best vehicle to convey real emotion. Better than cinema, better than moving images. There's something elemental about a photograph that in some way enables it to be this like empathy delivery system.
yeah. I mean, you've only got to look at the pictures of the starving children. There's one in particular that,
Exactly.
for coming out of Gaza.
Exactly.
And there you are. You're straight back to McCullen. You're straight back to
Exactly.
Ethiopia or Sudan or wherever. Um,
And my God, if that doesn't, I mean, for anyone that this is what I would say to anyone that doubts photography. It's got to be in one of the top three pastimes of almost everybody on the planet today, because most everything people consume is still images via social media.
And yet, I raised that point repeatedly, that we are in a situation today whereby everybody's life is completely and utterly dictated by photography. The moment you buy anything online, you make a decision online. Your food, your car, your house, your clothes, it doesn't matter. You're making the judgment based on a photograph. And
Absolutely.
yet, every time I point this out to people who aren't photographers, who've got thousands of photographs on their phones, are paying
Yeah.
huge amounts of data to store these photographs, they would never see themselves as photographers, because, like when you say about photographer,
Mm.
it does have, as a label, it does have
Mm.
some negative connotations
Mm.
and some connotations attached to it
Mm.
that people have problems aligning themselves with. So perhaps I put forward the suggestion that you are an empathetic documentarian.
Yeah, I'll take that.
We take that.
Here's the thing.
Ish.
I really love photography. Like I've got into a few things in my life, and there's maybe four things that I really care passionately about. Music would be one. Cinema would be another. Actually, reading books would be another. Photography is the only one that I was ever able to do without feeling like I was pretending to be someone that I'm not. It was it's kind of like the consolidation of everything that I've ever experienced gave me my eye. And I think that basically if you think you've got an eye, you're a photographer. You don't even need a camera to have an eye. If you've got that, if you can see it, and maybe that seeing is a reflection of what's happening. I mean, it should be because it's happening right, literally arm's distance from me most of the time. Um, but your whole life shapes how you make photographs.
Yeah.
It's not. I don't want to I don't want to veer us off on some more boring sucking eggs territory. But my God, if people still think that the kit is responsible for images,
But,
that was
I can't see how you can be a photographer and not be interested in music, not be interested in reading, not be
God,
interested
no.
in popular culture, or culture of any kind. I don't see how you can be, because it's those things that feed that inquisitive nature
I,
that is required.
I've been listening to the history of Greece recently, find it really fascinating. And I love that music was like an integral part of their being. And I can't, when I was listening to this on a audiobook, I thought to myself, do you know what? If they'd had photography then, that would have been an integral part of their society, of their culture, of their politics, of their everything. Because if music was, photography sure as hell would have been as well. Um, and this idea that, sometimes you feel, you asked me how it had been, and I touched on, it had broken me and then rebuilt myself, and that had a profound effect on my photography. One of the hardest things has been extended layoffs. Okay, so I had to self-isolate for 2 and a bit years because both my parents are highly vulnerable. During that, um, my mother, bless her, who I had never approached about making photographs with, said, "Look, if this kills me, I'm never going to get the chance to tell my story. I want to do it." So I think I only made photographs with her 5 or 6 times through that 2 year period, but they were really intense moments for me because I had to hear her life story, which is devastating. And one of the things that we'd gone through and came out the other side of was that it was the switch over from disability living allowance to PIP, personal independence payment, where they basically called every person on a health related benefits bluff and said, you need this benefit, prove it to us. I'd got a note from mum's doctor saying, look, if you send someone out, there's a mortal risk that the stress could trigger a seizure that could kill her. You don't need to do this. She's been blah, 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 blah. They sent someone out. She ran out of the house crying, I shouldn't be here. She didn't even know what an epileptic seizure was, which I found insane. 2 weeks later, we get a letter saying your mum's declared fit for work. And thus then began an 8-month battle to have this overturned. And the damage that did to my family, to my mum and my dad. I mean, they're here, but I mean, I say in the book, I'll never see them smile again. They're terrified. You know, that's a hard thing to go through. And, you know, the the weird thing for me is like I'm going to try and take it back to like photographer and it the feeling that I had making photographs through that period with my own family didn't and don't differ to the feelings that I have with people that I met as strangers in my own community. And weirdly, I found some kind of joy in that. Out of all of this pain and all of this suffering, I love the idea that with photography, because of photography, really, photography is the thing that brought me out of a really bad depression and agoraphobia and to rejoin the epidermis of my community, right? I'm not in my community. None of the people in this book are in my community. We're all on the outside of it. But it's still like my family. It's still my group.
But I
And
think
that,
that's what's so important, Jim, is and why probably we've stayed friends for so long is that anybody who sees your work understands that you are giving of yourself fully within that. And certainly that work you made of your mum, which I know there were extra things we don't need to go into and
yeah,
issues that occurred around it, but was without doubt some of the most powerful work, which I always work on the basis that really powerful work is work you can't look at. It's work that you think, oh, hang on a minute here. Can I actually deal with this? And I
when
think that was the case with some of it. I think that's fair, yeah?
I find it hard to look at most of my work. In fact, I don't.
Mm.
When I when I exhibited at Side in 2019, I had a huge panic attack. You wouldn't know it. I'm having it whilst there's a video on YouTube, and I'm having it while I'm giving this talk. Um, That was the first time I ever walked into a like a big show that was the work that we'd been making, and everybody was very complimentary and really excited. And but because it just for me it hit me like a ton of brick, like a bullet. It hit me because suddenly I was surrounded because I was in all of those moments. You know, I feel like my job is to be there to preserve that moment, but not to infringe on it. You know, because it's not my story; it's that person's story, and I want to be as invisible as Caravaggio is, or David Hockney is, or you know what I mean? You don't think of those people when you look at their paintings or Kittai, or you don't see them. You don't think, oh, the painter's just there. When you look at a Francis Bacon painting, you don't think of his messy studio, right? And that's always what I wanted from photographs. I wanted to bring that person, to transpose that person into that moment in an environment, which meant I couldn't be there in the picture, but I was there as a person, and to be surrounded by to know the full spectrum of pain and suffering and stress and worry, and that was heavy. That was really heavy. So yeah, it doesn't matter whether I'm looking at my work or someone else's work. Like I will never look at photography as a photographer. I'll only ever look at photography as a human being. So disrespectful, I think, to look at like I sometimes see people talking about who are they talking about? It might have been McCullen actually for ideas, or well, I'm going to use that angle. I'm like, Jesus Christ, that's in all good faith. You know, this stuff can maybe wash over you subconsciously, but if that's your reason, the only reason you're looking at that work, you're missing out. And I find that like really disrespectful to the people actually in the pictures. And probably to McCullen as well, because his intent isn't to make a book for photographers to look at to get fucking ideas.
No, but also I think, when I was talking about McCullen and
Mm,
there are other photographers I can name from a similar perspective.
mm.
That it was the work was always a personal journey for them
Yeah,
in trying to work something out for them, and I think that, that's something as photographers we kind of have to accept
yeah,
is that
I
that
fully
powerful work.
accept that.
Yeah, because
But
also it's really ethical.
don't you think that as well as that, or maybe parallel to that, because you've got that in here, and I think that that helps shapes your intent and your morality and your ethics and all of that sort of stuff. It's when that gets made the spine of the work and it can be seen that I find my skin starts to crawl, my heckles go up because I'm like, okay, so now you're usurping this pain to satiate like some need in yourself or to say something about yourself. It's like I look at oh god damn it. The name, oh, I'm gonna hate myself for forgetting this name on camera. Minimata, Eugene Smith.
Eugene Smith.
Yeah, he's everywhere in his work, but I don't see him. I, I, I see the photographs, but he's obviously there. You know, that was something that I had to juggle for quite a long time, and I still stick to my guns on it. I still don't ever want to make it about me.
No, but at the same time,
Mm,
if I'm going to play slightly devil's advocate, and I think it's
please.
interesting you mentioned Eugene Smith because of the darkness in his personal life from when he was a child.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know his father killed himself when Eugene was a small boy by gassing himself in the family car in the garage.
Mm.
So that was kind of the beginning of his life, and so his struggles with depression and everything else. There's a great book, actually, I think, written by Jim Hughes. He says, turning around and looking at a bookshelf, which is Eugene Smith's biography, which is I highly recommend. But there was always a darkness in Eugene's work. There was always an intense black and there was always that sense of shadow, and I do see that, and I've written about that, in your work, that there is quite often you're not afraid of making work which might be, I don't know, 70-80% of the frame is just black, or that sense. I get that sense of coldness, that smell of damp, that smell of, that feeling that if you go into a house that hasn't can't afford to turn the heating on for months, there is a feeling about that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%.
And
Um,
I do get that from your work, which is why I think it is so powerful because it takes us viscerally into that situation, not just visually.
oh, you're good at this. Yeah. You know, my life has not been easy. Put it like that. Um, it's an interesting premise to mull over. How does, let's say, quite an extreme life affect how one sees? Not in respect to, um, you know, we used to do this thing about street photography and conversation. You know, it's a human safari. You push in the shutter, but really you're trophy hunting. And I don't mean that kind of seeing, because I think that's something very, very different.
I think that's
But
looking, not seeing.
yeah, well, it's staring, it's rubbernecking.
Mm.
That's an act of taking. Um, but the things that we live through, no doubt, affect us consciously and subconsciously. And I would propose that the way that it's affected me is that, I mean, I can remember the moment that I stopped drinking. I'd hit rock bottom, was in a really bad way. Everything was a mess. And very shortly after that, I'd been given this camera to borrow, and I'd made a couple of pictures of WH, who lives a couple of doors down. And that moment came back to me and really is responsible for me saying, oh, hang on, this is a picture of a moment. How would I have felt if somebody made a picture of me at my lowest, but they didn't know what came before and they didn't know what came after? And that life lesson became a photographic ethical lesson that experience in my life taught me that no, I can't just make pot shots. I can't not give anybody the opportunity to have their say. And that kind of corralled me into this idea of, well, all photographs really are witnesses and this vehicle, this device, this tool to help transport someone into that moment, but also to be there for the testimony. Because it's my big inspiration was always photographs that appeared in Sunday supplements, and they always appeared next to text. There was always a story attached to them. You can go back to like even the like Bruce Richardson stuff in, what was it, 68, I think, in the Sunday Observer. And Life magazine. There's an amazing story. It's like go out for 48 hours and make a story. It wasn't just a collection of photographs. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that this is better or worse. This is just my bag. This is my deal. For me, that's when photographs really sing. When you don't leave the person looking at them going, well, what is going on?
Yeah. I've just thought of something. You've made me think of something which I've never considered before. But, there's always all this discussion around making photos or taking photos.
Mm,
But actually, I think I've just come across a word I think that maybe is more appropriate, which is receiving
yeah,
photographs,
yeah.
actually.
They are given. They are given
Yeah.
to us. I remember once speaking with Giles Dooley, who I love
Yeah.
massively, and we were talking about, I think we were talking about kit and stuff, or why people are obsessed with it. And he said something like, it's never going to teach you where to stand. Just as, but I took it not just as physically, I took it morally as well, you know? And I think that part of what makes, or, or maybe the most overlooked component of a photographer, whatever that may be, however that may realize itself, is that most of it is what you've lived through and what you've loved. I know that there's certain pieces of music that I think about when I'm holding the camera, you know? Like, I'll try and give you an example. Um, there's a track on, or in fact, the whole Spirit of Eden album by Talk Talk. It's very emotional music. Um, that's often going on in my head in the back. I can't stop it. It's just there. It really affects me. Like I always edit to the same four different pieces of music, always when I'm sequencing and looking at stuff. And um, so yeah, I want to get back to your point. This thing of, am I a photographer? Well, yeah, I'm a photographer. Okay, with an emphasis on a human being first. I walk into the room before the camera. The camera doesn't walk in before me. Um, and the thing about enduring pain being around it for so long, either family or community. Um, and from an early age, from a very, again, I was talking to Giles about this just the other day. We were talking about David Lynch and what a massive impression he'd had on us. And I remembered this and was telling Giles that I can remember being 13 and going into my school library, and I hated school and school hated me. Finding a book, it was like a little compendium on David Lynch films, and I hadn't seen any, but it had Eraserhead, Elephant Man, and I think Blue Velvet, and I hadn't seen it yet. But that book hit did something to me, you know. So I guess from then, whether or not the things we pull to us that we receive are constructed, or maybe those doors are like left open because of the things that we've lived through, because those things saved me. The art, for want of a better word, be it in music or literature or cinema, saved me. Really did. I go back to me at 13 and 14 and 15, and the books I was reading, the films I was trying to watch, the music I was listening to, that had a huge, still, I mean, I can still go back to the very first time I watched Paris, Texas. Got my TV, put it under the duvet because it was a school night, watched it. That's never left me, that experience. I wonder how much of, because when I first got a camera, I didn't have to go through a process of, well, how do I make pictures? Because I had quite a few years of watching cinema and loving it, and not really knowing that what I was doing was studying cinematography. Same with painting. So, same with music, same with books and the pictures that the books would create in my head. So all of that like legwork that maybe people do, they get a camera and they go, right, what do I do with this? Well, go and do that. Go and have a little bit of life. Go and watch a load, read a load, listen to a load, and then let that become part of your receiving apparatus, you know?
I do, Jim. I think that this could go on for a long time, but I'm going to call it an end at that, because that sums it up really. Is if you want to be a photographer, you've got to live a life first, or at least you've got to live a life whilst you're
Whilst.
taking images.
That's the thing. Don't remove yourself from the process. That's the big one.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people adopt this role of photographer. No, be a human being. Use the tool. That's it.
perfect. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. Thanks, mate.